Hello everyone, welcome back, and thank you for joining us on the Live Unreal with Glover U podcast, where every week, Jeff Glover and the Glover U coaches will dive deep into the questions that you are asking. They understand the challenges you are facing on a day-to-day basis because they still work every day on the front lines of real estate, with Jeff and his team closing over 1,000 homes per year. In today's episode, Glover U head coach Kate Simon continues the conversation with Tommy Kunkel about accepting changes and making decisions to thrive during difficult times. We will learn from Kate how a mindset perspective shift can help you to accept changes, make sound decisions, and thrive. Now, let's hear from Kate Simon.
But yeah, so like we were saying, a lot of people have times and not the ability to, like some people have a lot of time to sit and think and meditate. Some people don't, but everybody's being affected in one way or another. So if you have that time and you're unhappy with it, or you have a little bit of extra time and you're still unhappy with it, you still have a little bit of time where you can take that, think on it, and then make a choice and a decision and change that trajectory just a little bit. So in the future, your life does look more like what you want it to.
Yeah. And I kind of, I hear that and I have a couple, I guess, perspectives. And I think it kind of depends on the day and where I'm kind of going with my own journey. But there's a piece where it's okay if you're not constantly trying to change your life. And there has to come a point in time where like, we can also accept things exactly as they are. And I think that space there really comes through like pausing, and whether you want to call it meditation, whether you want to call it prayer, whether you want to call it journaling, whatever it is, it's holding space in your day for accepting things exactly as they are, but also with a level of conscious awareness of the areas that you may want to tweak, change, and improve upon without making whatever you're going through right this second wrong. Right? Because I think that that's also kind of a toxic habit that we have, is that we're so focused, much like this pandemic, we're so focused on getting to the next version of ourselves, hitting the next goal, that we never stop to actually appreciate where we're at in this moment, which again creates this whole like vacuum of no fulfillment, and you're constantly chasing different goals and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I think it ties right back into the Stoicism part.
Yeah.
I love Stoicism. It's a little hardcore, especially in this day and age, to live 100%.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But there's so many good teachings in it. So if you can't sit in that moment and be okay with it, you're not okay with life, because that's all you have. This moment's it. The past is gone and the future hasn't happened. So why are we going to sit here and be upset all day long, every day, instead of just acknowledging that feeling and moving on to the things that we can control again? So just kind of redirect.
Well, it's interesting you say that. And I know that there's a lot of different perspectives on this, but in some way, shape, or form, this need to consume news, to consume content, to argue various points on social media or whatever it is, at its root, if you really peel back the actions, the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, it's this need for control. It's this need to understand. It's this need to make sense of something that is so painful and so, it's uplifting our entire, it's uprooting our entire world right now. And it's this need of control. And I think that, again, it's a very firm grip of attachment. It's a cousin of attachment. It's letting that go, letting go of, even if we think we found some truth in something, that even if we did, that truth is going to pass by in the next day and the next moment just as much as the bad moment is, right?
And I think it ties, I know the term has a really negative annotation to it, but the ego, basically. I mean, It all ties back to the ego, that I can control this. I have attachment to it. It's mine. And letting go of that is painful. It's like ripping out a piece of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, because it feels very personal and it feels very vulnerable. I mean, to be in this exposed place of, and like you said, I mean, we're all hardwired for survival. But the truth of it is, if we feel a feeling we don't like, is it really going to kill us? No. But somewhere along the lines, that's sort of how we're policing our thoughts and policing our actions. And we're trying to protect ourselves from this realization that there's not a whole lot we can control in any facet of our life. The best we can do is keep showing up the best version of ourselves as we evolve through this.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned a word yesterday I've never really heard the word before, but it makes perfect sense. And I think it ties into the flip side of what we're talking about. And that was the toxic positivity.
Yeah.
You see all these bad things, and instead of embracing it, going through it and following each step through to the next level, falling in love with that process, we just blindside and say, screw it. I'm positive. None of this is happening. I'm happy.
Yeah.
I'm reading happy books. I'm watching happy stuff. I'm good.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that toxic positivity is a lot harder to spot than somebody like overtly kind of being negative and struggling with that process. But toxic positivity in and of itself is like its own struggle. And there's this concept of like, if I cover my ears and cover my eyes, this whole thing's not happening. And it's like, well, okay, so you might be having a better experience than the person who's suffering, but you're doing the same thing. You're not moving towards the discomfort. And by the way, I think there's a fine line between acknowledging the scary things and negativity without staying in that space and like deeming it permanent, right? It's kind of what we said a couple moments ago, where you can accept it, but you also have to accept that this isn't permanent and you don't have to stay there, right? So toxic positivity is sort of on the opposite end. And that kind of shows up where somebody might be feeling something, and this could be pandemic or not. Somebody could be saying, hey, I lost a loved one. I'm having a really hard day. And the response could be, oh, it could be worse. Or, oh, you have so much to be grateful for. And it's like, okay, well, thank you for completely undermining my experience, right?
Yeah.
Thank you for denying a reality that's very real for me. So, toxic positivity is actually in the same camp of staying down and staying in this negative mindset. It's just the car you're riding in just might be a little bit more enjoyable, right? But you're still not acknowledging, the tough stuff. So.
And you still got that backpack on that you haven't unloaded. So eventually that stuff, all that dark stuff.
You're just telling everybody it's not that heavy. You're just telling people that you got it, right? That's not that heavy. And it's like, okay, that's great. But, the question then becomes is, if I'm overly positive, why would I knowingly go to that place? Why would I knowingly, I'm in a good place, Tommy. Why would I go and look in that closet with all those dark, scary things? And I think, look, there's some validity of make sure you're kind of showing up and you're enjoying your experience. And it might not be an everyday thing, but you go into that backpack and you unpack those things so that you can keep evolving into a better version of yourself in the future.
Exactly.
Because otherwise you're staying in this one dimension. That's great. You might be happy here, but are you really experiencing life? Are you really showing up to everybody in your world to the highest and best degree that you could? And oftentimes we unlock those things by going through the backpack.
Exactly. And I'm not a hiker, but my son's a Boy Scout, so he camps. I wouldn't send him out on a hiking trip with a backpack that was loaded up without him knowing what was in there. Like, you have your 10 essentials. Do you have a canteen? Do you have water? Like, no, I got a backpack. I'm fine. I'm good.
Yeah.
You have a sleeping mat? It's kind of cold out. I mean, you kind of want to unpack every Thursday night before they go hiking. They leave on Fridays. They have a pack check every Thursday night. They go in, they pull everything out, they inspect it, and then they load it back up and go.
Sure.
So, I mean,
sure.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, relating that to what we're going through right now. If you're willing to acknowledge all the tough stuff and still stay in a positive place, that's different than the whole toxic positivity, right? Like that's, I don't want to say it's okay or not. Look, it's not for me to judge. Like, that's a healthier approach than just pretending that it doesn't exist, So.
And so we were talking about resources. I found a really cool one last night that ties into, I think, this perfect. Let me know if it's off base. So this guy, his name's Jason McAllister. He goes by Mac. He was a fighter pilot. And he shared something called the OODA loop. OODA. Observe, orient, decide, act. So you can pull out that backpack. You can observe what's in there, orientate where you are, decide what needs to do, and then you go and take the action. And if that action is putting everything back in the backpack and going forward, just the way you are, that's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so you need to follow it all the time. So eventually you stop. You need to observe, what was in my backpack again?
Yeah.
Orient yourself. You decide what you need to do, and then you keep going. Is it time to unload my backpack again and deal with some of this stuff, or do I just keep going? Or, Yeah, so I just thought that was a really cool kind of thing.
And it's funny the way that you're saying it. It's like, okay, there's this thing in my backpack, and at some point or another, you have to ask yourself, like, how much that's showing up in your relationships, in your work. And it's like, okay, the thing that's the loudest in your backpack, the thing that keeps kind of inserting itself into like your experience, yeah, that's probably the thing you should start unpacking first, right? And then you kind of work with that, you digest that, and then like, oh, this other thing in my backpack is now the loudest thing. Like now this is the thing that shows up most for me. And then it's kind of going deep on those things. So it's not about like pouring out all the contents and like doing it at once. It's really sort of taking that linear approach of what shows up most consistently in my relationships and my work and my friendships and how I view the world. What's the dialogue that I'm bringing to each situation, and finding that thing in the backpack that you can kind of work through in silence.
Yeah, that's well said.
I've got some resources too, so let me know if and when you want me to share those and how that kind of.
We can throw them out as we go. If we want to save them all for the end, that's fine. Like I said, this one just kind of popped in my head. I was like, that kind of fits what we're doing, so we're pull it up really quick. And like you were saying, you don't have to pull everything out of the backpack. There's another term. It comes from the military, just like I think the UDA does. I'm not military, but my family, I have a lot of family members that are, and love the military, but they're saying that ounces equal pounds. So for everything you put in that backpack, you got to carry the backpack. So every ounce adds up to a pound. Well, 16 of them. So you get enough of them, you add another pound, and all of a sudden your 50-pound pack turns into an 80-pound pack, and all of a sudden you can't hike anymore. You can't run. You can't do anything. So picking what's in that pack that needs to be unloaded first, like you were saying, and getting rid of those ounces a little bit at a time is just a really good kind of process, I think, to deal with it to begin with, before you dump the whole thing out and get kicked out.
And what that might look like in the context of what we're all dealing with right now might just be the easiest thing to let go of that would have the biggest effect, that would lighten the load, is just curiosity and letting go of judgment. So as we're scrolling social media, as we're reading news articles saying, that's interesting, and I'm going to let it just be that. I'm not going to attach a meaning to it. I'm not going to attach my personal experience and my personal opinion to it. I'm just going to release the judgment for today. And by all means, you have permission to pick that judgment back up tomorrow if you'd like. But for a day, practice letting it go and see how that feels, and see how you show up differently and how that experience feels.
Just kind of an acceptance more so than like they have their opinion and that's okay. I don't need to fight it right now. And like you said, you can come back. I can fight it in 10 minutes if I want to, if it's still there. But for right now, right this second, I can accept it.
And by the way, I feel like sometimes acceptance gets like confused a lot with approval. Yeah. And people say things like, well, there's no way I could accept what's going on. How could you possibly accept this? And it's no. I'm not saying I'm okay with it. And I'm not staying here and saying that this is the end goal here. But what I'm saying is that I'm okay with being okay with exactly how things are right now. And I'll move to the next thing when it's appropriate, right? You can accept things as they are. You can accept, a negative feeling, a negative conversation, negative emotion without, owning it and carrying it with you and wearing it for the rest of the day or week or year,
Exactly. Yeah. And just with that, so the acceptance on the flip side of that kind of is people are waiting for somebody else to either decide or control their fate instead of just deciding and taking an action for themselves of what needs to happen. No, I can't control if the governor lets me open my business, but I can decide my thoughts, I can decide my feelings, and I can control which action steps I take to make sure that I'm okay in the long run. On the flip side, when this is over, right now, all of it, like I said, is that making sense?
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. And what kind of comes to mind mostly is, so I work with a handful of fitness clients as well. We, I have a small group of people I help with their nutrition and their training protocols, et cetera, et cetera. And for the most part, a lot of my own personal training and a lot of the training protocols I give them, it requires you to have access to a gym. This is kind of part of the deal here. Yeah. And, when that option sort of ripped away from them, we have an interesting decision. Like, do we decide that this isn't something we're going to work on anymore until we have a gym again? Or are we going to find other things that we can sort of improve on and work on in the meantime, right? And look, I'll be honest. I mean, my training's been modified. I work out in my garage with a barbell, and it's probably half capacity that I normally would do. I'm not hitting the same muscle groups, whatever. But I've accepted that and sort of have released attachment to, what this chapter of my training is going to look like, right? So I've sort of decided that, I'm going to win in this different way where I'm used to reading a 2-page program for a workout and following everything. I'm now taking a slightly more intuitive approach and just going in the garage and moving my body and doing what feels right, right? And then I think we also forget, just an example of fitness of, well, oh my gosh, we don't know what's going on, so what's the point? And it's like, well, you can still control the food you put in your mouth, right?
All of it.
If so long as we can all afford groceries, like you can still control like not having a bottle of wine every night because you're stressed, right? So we could talk about that too. So I think it's about finding and understanding what you can control in every situation. And again, making sure that you bring those mile markers in to be appropriate, right? So the goals that we may have set when somebody had full access to a gym, or when some of my clients weren't homeschooling their kids and working full time, might look completely different than the goals that, we set now when they're just trying to survive. So I think it's about having compassion with yourself on what's appropriate right now, right? And I really try to make sure we're making a conscious effort every month with my clients to make sure that the goal is true for them right now and that it's attainable for them right now, even if it looks completely different than a goal that was attainable for them 60 days ago.
And that's okay too. I mean, goals can change. They don't have to, they're not stagnant. So they can scale back with the times as they change, and then you can throttle it back up, or you can scale it down, start your new reality, and then you can realize maybe I can still hit that same goal doing what I'm doing now with the tools I have, but you didn't see it in the beginning. So kind of that mindset perspective shift.
Well, and I think that when we think about doing that, there's oftentimes like a feeling of guilt or, again, unworthiness that comes with, oh man, I used to be able to do X. Now I'm only doing Y. And it's, again, like, let's practice releasing the meaning of you doing X versus Y, right? Like, what does it mean if you were able to achieve X and you're only able to achieve Y? That you're less worthy, that you're less this, that you're less that. Like, so those are the moments where I'm encouraging people to sit with themselves and ask, what's the dialogue going on in here? Is it true? Is it real? And if it's not, is there an alternate reality here? Is there an alternate perspective that we could be carrying with us that might feel a little bit different? Might feel better.
Yeah. And then kind of what shift can you make with it too?
Yeah.
So this isn't about me. I don't want to talk about anything personal, but my wife and I are opening a fitness studio. Our first day was supposed to be March 16th.
Oh,
really bad time.
Yeah.
Talk about a little extra stress load. We're like, wait a minute, we're supposed to have our first class today. No. And the governor said no.
Yeah.
And we still don't have a date. So we could have just curled up and cried. It could have sucked really bad.
And by the way, if you did, that's okay too, right?
Yeah. Well, I had a moment of like, oh, fudge, what the heck just happened? That's not cool.
Right.
I put my real estate career on hold for months to get the studio up and going because we did all the work ourselves, and we're still doing it. But when that happened, we're like, well, what do we do now? We observed, we oriented, and we decided we're going to shift it to online training.
Yes.
And then we took action, got a coach, and we're implementing that. So one day the doors will open, but in the meantime, we're building a system and a model that will allow us to sustain in case this comes back in the fall again.
Yeah.
Like it's predicted it might happen.
Right.
But I didn't control the death plague. I didn't control everything getting shut down. But the thing we did control is what action we can take and how we can prevent it in the future. So
yeah. Well, and I know that you and I both like have the same sentiment towards the word pivot. I hate the word pivot, but it's
stop. Yeah.
But it is a skill, right? Yeah. Being able to move from one thing to another without losing too much steam and still being focused on the outcome at play without attaching any meaning to it. Without attaching any meaning to the fact that, oh my gosh, your fitness studio didn't open. Are you a failure?
No.
And like, listen, this is an opportunity for us to learn and patch up some holes that maybe we didn't see in the future and kind of adapt and overcome.
Yeah. And that's like the silver lining or whatever it is. Another word I'm not a big fan of, but
Yeah.
we've been able to patch a whole bunch of holes. It's going to be 10 times better when it opens. And we're also going to be able to do kind of a hybrid now with the online and the in-person.
Yeah.
Where we can serve people at a way higher level than just what we were going to be able to do. So
yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. So we're stoked. But so there are positives in it, and not to have the toxic positivity, but eventually something positive will come out of it. And it's just
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that it's just painful in that messy middle right now. And it's unknown, and I think that's the scariest thing that people are probably going through, and we're all going through.
Oh, yeah.
And again, it's just staying rooted in what's the next best move right now based on the information I have, putting so much stock into this like very scary place of what the future could potentially look like, because that's when I've noticed myself getting the most worked up or the most stressed or the most upset is not on the reality, right? Because the reality, I'm looking around, okay, I'm working from home more, and obviously my reality is a lot different than some other people's in this, so I want to be sensitive to that, but my day-to-day reality is not that bad. It's not that scary, right? And I know for some people it is. So, but I think we need to stay rooted in what's true for me today and what's true for me tomorrow, and not what's the potential in 9 months or whatever. Now, granted, yes, there's a factor of planning for it and making sure that we sharpen our tools in the meantime, but we don't want to stay in that space, because ultimately, again, it's not something we can control, and it can cause a lot of mental and emotional turmoil and stress.
Exactly. And just to kind of tie into there, focusing on the now, I read it, I want to say it was from the Stoic philosophy, but depression is living in the past, and the anxiety comes from living in the future. So if you're feeling anxious, it's because of a thought, a feeling, that uncertainty that you're mentioning of the future.
Yeah.
So if you just kind of oriented words, awesome words. If you could take that feeling, acknowledge that you don't even have to do anything with it. It's not a bad feeling. Just acknowledge that it's there. Acknowledge that it's something in the future that you are unsure about. It'll let you get back to that perspective and actually be able to take action to do something about it.
Yeah. And one of the things I've noticed is that, like, sometimes we have a habit of attaching meaning to feelings. And we have a habit of like drawing conclusions of, I'm feeling really stressed or upset right now, therefore all these other things must be true as well. And I think we need to remember that even the most intense emotions that we feel, for as real and as crippling and as paralyzing as they feel, they're no more true than the happy, relaxed feelings that we might feel on like a Sunday morning walk. It's just a feeling, right? And it's a very different experience, and it's very painful, and it's very, oh my gosh, right? But I think sometimes when we can understand that our emotions are really like it's weather that we have to sort of sit through sometimes, it can allow us to see that this too shall pass. This is not a permanent feeling. Therefore, I don't have to make any permanent conclusions or decisions because of it.
Just
And I'll kind of tie this in. It's an interesting story. So when all this was happening, obviously we had, Jeff Taylor and we had meetings about, okay, how is this going to affect coaching? I mean, obviously if our clients aren't selling real estate, they sure as heck aren't paying for coaching, right? And we really put a plan together, which I won't go into, but we put a plan together on what our thoughts were on how that would show up. And we initially did have much less than we expected, just a handful, 5 or less clients who opted to pause their coaching over the course of 60 days, which we allowed them to do during this time. And one of my clients I was talking to this week, and she says, Kate, I kind of paused my coaching prematurely in anticipation for the worst, which, by the way, I think, you have to be financially responsible, make some good decisions. She says, we're actually busier than we've ever been, and it's actually not as bad as we thought. So I think sometimes we make decisions based on our emotions, and that's where we get ourselves in the most trouble. And obviously that's an inconsequential one. I mean, it's easy. Okay, cool. We go full force again when you're ready. But look at the other big decisions we've made in the wake of a heavy emotion that ultimately ended up passing, Yeah.
And I feel like you hit the nail on the head. We make all decisions based on emotion.
Yeah.
We justify with logic after the fact.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
We're emotional beings. Every single thing we do is based on our emotions. And then we justify with facts, data, logic, whatever it may be, to make that feeling feel good.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And so it's just been kind of interesting observing from 100 feet up on how some of our clients, everybody was, scared to some degree, how they kind of showed up, and then seeing them come to this realization of, oh, wow, it actually didn't happen that way. It's kind of a cool moment a teaching moment to say, okay, great. Where else does this show up in your life, right? Where else do you pull the trigger before you kind of look where you're shooting, stuff like that.
Yeah. That's the ready, fire, aim technique.
Yeah, exactly. No, probably another military.
Probably. I think it's the opposite of what the military teaches. I hope maybe a jihadi.
Yeah, hopefully not. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's the old thing with muskets or something. I'm not sure. We were talking about budgeting mental capacity too.
Yeah.
So how does that look in these times of strangeness?
Yeah. Well, okay, so it's my belief, and I know this has probably been talked about before, and the concept was actually introduced to me in the terms of, what do you call it, like an autoimmune disease. So I had some friends that I knew with, lupus or some sort of autoimmune disease, and they have this theory that they use with other people who have, autoimmune disease, and it's called the spoon theory. And I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. And it essentially says that you get a certain amount of spoons per day. Let's call it 25 spoons. I don't know. And each task you decide to do takes a certain amount of spoons, right? So, if you wake up and make breakfast, that might be 1 or 2 spoons, pretty low commitment. And then you decide you want to go to the gym. Well, that might be 6 spoons. And then you've got friends who want to come over and, get dinner or lunch. Well, that might be 6 spoons. And pretty soon, it's a way to budget your energy with what you have. Now, I think probably an easier way for all of this to understand this is imagine starting every day that you have a mental or emotional capacity and it's $100 bill. Each decision you make, each choice you make has a mental and emotional cost. Right. And it kind of factors into willpower and developing habits and developing, thoughts and behaviors. Mm-hmm. And that's often why people say, hey, if you want to start a habit or if you want to start working out, do it first thing in the morning. It's the easiest thing to get done. It's because you have the most mental capacity at that time. Yeah. Whereas some people who are trying to start a habit of working out, it's Monday, they go on 2 listing appointments, they hit their prospecting, they have a dinner meeting, and then they come home and they've run out of money. They've run out of mental and emotional capacity. Yeah. They're done, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing that happens is we also use that mental and emotional, we also use that mental and emotional capacity in conversations with people. It could be positive conversations that might add $20 to our budget, right? Like with a coach or a mentor, or it could be a negative conversation where, it costs us $25 of $100 a day. So what I'm noticing a lot of is we have to get better at budgeting our mental and emotional capacity. And my personal way of doing that is limiting my exposure to the news, limiting my exposure to scrolling on Facebook, because I was noticing that, wow, I'm spending a lot more of my mental and emotional time than I normally do. And I need to limit the source that's draining it the most. So it's being very aware of how we feel going into conversations, coming out of them, and being very aware of like what fills me up and what doesn't. And then making appropriate decisions with our time, with our mental energy, and spending it accordingly. Because ultimately, look, if we spend all of our time poring over the news and the media, and we've spent all of our mental capacity there, how much do we really have for, my husband, your wife, and your kids at the end of the day? It's like, well, they're getting the brunt of it, right? And is that how you want to be showing up? Yeah. So it's kind of, it's budgeting the conversations, the thoughts, the feelings, and emotions in the day, and how much you kind of have capacity for. And Jeff and Taylor, if they watch this, they'll laugh. And there's sometimes Jeff throws stuff at me and I'm like, I don't have the capacity today. I'll get to it tomorrow, right? And it'll be first on my list tomorrow, but I don't have enough in my tank right now to give that what it needs and what it deserves. So it's being hyper aware of that, and that, you don't have an unlimited resource of having a positive mind, and being very careful of that, not to run yourself in the ground.
So I think the technical term, that's your glycogen stores, right? The amount of sugar in your brain that can process high function.
Oh, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. But I know,
is that a thing? Yes, I guess so.
Yeah, like Google glycogen store.
Okay.
Every time you make a big decision, you get about 3 or 4 big decisions a day, and that's it. And then the rest of those spoons. So the spoon the activities that take 6 spoons, those would be your big stores. So you'll get 3 or 4 of those. And then the little stuff, the scrolling on Facebook, that might be the 1 spoon.
Yeah.
Those are the lower glycogen stores that you can do at the end of the day.
Well, like you said, right? Ounces lead to pounds, right?
Exactly.
So where do you limit that leaking of your mental and emotional capacity so that you can show up stronger in these other areas?
So I'm curious, how many people do you talk to that don't even know they have a budget?
I don't know. I mean, I typically talk to all of my one-on-one clients about it in some way, shape, or form. But I mean, probably most people, they know the feeling of it. Everybody's probably experienced the feeling of, wow, I'm burnt out, or wow, I'm mentally drained. You know, you kind of hear that. Or sometimes if my husband has like a really long day at work, he'll say like, I feel like I take an SAT test every day. Like, yeah, okay. So you know what that feels like. You might just not be able to kind of put it into words. Or they might not have the concept of, oh, okay, this is a resource to me that I can hone, that I can budget, and I can use to my advantage. Some people might just think, wow, I just don't have the energy, right? So I think probably everybody's aware of that feeling. I'm just not sure if everybody's known how to put it in.
Don't have a label for it or a way to express it and budget it. So I think that's really cool. Is there a resource or a way to utilize it better besides just acknowledging it? Like a decision-making process? I know you said do things in the morning. Does that tie into your sleep pattern? Anything like that?
Definitely. So there's ways to increase your mental and emotional capacity. And by the way, it's heavily personal. I mean, Jeff is a machine, and his mental and emotional capacity, with or without sleep, has always been way superior to me and probably anybody else I've ever known. Like, he's just got a huge mental and emotional capacity. It's why he's good at it. Right. Like, it's why he's so good at what he does. Right. But there's, for those of us who might have an average or even a below average mental capacity or, burnout. Yeah, there are definitely ways you can increase that. And that's obviously through monitoring your diet, right? That can add $20, $50 to your budget, monitoring your sleep, right? Like, I know that if I don't get enough sleep the night before, which of course, being the analytical I am, of course I track that. If I know that I don't get the sleep that I do, I might have to make one less decision the next day, or it might not be the day for a big workout, or it might not be the day for a tough conversation with a colleague or a client or something like that. So I think over time, it's just a very personal level. Some of us are working with a bigger budget than others, and it's making sure that we're not unnecessarily seeking, through diet, through, sleep and some of these other things that I know for me, mentally and emotionally can tax me if they're not, up to par.
Nice. Have you looked into like sleep chronotypes at all?
No, but sleep is kind of one of those areas. Like, I know I talked earlier about going deep and being like really curious. Like, that's like sleep and recovery in general is like one of like my things that I'm really obsessed with right now. So it's something I'd like to know more about. Look
up sleep chronotypes. It takes, not just like the science of sleep, but it takes sleep patterns to another level.
Okay.
So I guess the gist of it, there's cool YouTube videos. I'll send you a link or I'll post it on here to a test to tell you what kind of sleep chronotype you have. But there's like a dolphin, there's a lion, there's a bear, and a wolf.
Okay.
So the bear is about 50% of the population. They go to sleep in the evening and they sleep all the way into the morning. They need their 8-9 hours of sleep every day. The lion's the go-getter, I wake up at 4 a.m. and I do everything, but I'm done by 7. Yeah. And then the dolphin's kind of your insomniac.
Oh, okay.
The wolf would be your night owl.
Okay.
So if you
definitely the bear. I'm whichever type needs 9 hours of sleep a night. Yeah. Otherwise, things don't work for me.
Yeah, that's me all day. If I don't sleep, I'm a useless human being.
Right. So that's why it's kind of hard to say like, oh, you need 8 to 9 hours. Now, of course, there's studies that say like, sure, there's biological functions. You need this much sleep. But to your point, yes, it's becoming aware of at what point do you feel like, okay, great, I had a great day. And where does it go over that for you where you feel mentally and emotionally drained? And then having an awareness and a reflection of like reflecting back on, oh, after this conversation, I really didn't feel great. Or after that conversation, I really didn't feel great. And then kind of playing defense on those in the future, right?
Yeah.
So it's unfortunately, there is no one size fits all. It's a constant trial and error. And it does require kind of reflection of if I feel beat at the end of the day, I'm kind of looking back at my day and trying to identify why.
Yeah. And that's a good thing. I had an experience when I was a kid, but it pretty much just flipped a switch in me. And I just don't do things I don't like to.
Yeah.
Like,
Great.
yeah.
That sounds awesome.
To an extent. I mean, it could be detrimental, but there's certain things. And to get to a goal, I will crap all day to get there.
Yeah.
But if I don't think it, and I didn't know what it was in the beginning, I was like, this isn't benefiting me. I'm leaving. Like, bye. And I'll just walk away. I'm just done. But I realized it kind of goes to that Pareto principle. 80% of your results come from 20% of what you do.
Yeah,
I'm going to spend 80% of my time on this garbage that I hate. So, and I wasn't able to annotate it till recently when I learned more.
Yeah.
But being able to figure out what that 20% of your main actions are and spending your time there will free up a lot more of that glycogen or those spoons to do the important stuff and have a mental reserve for the wife, the husband, the kids, the cat. I mean, for everybody.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, and I think we all probably have that like natural like affinity towards that. And I know like we talk about it a little bit in Keller Williams, like with the KPA. It's like, well, here's who you are naturally, and you can show up, you know, as a different version of that, but just know it's going to take a lot more mental time and energy to get there.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that we do have to look at that, right? Like, is the resistance that we're experiencing, is it necessary to go through to get to that goal? Like, is this growth resistance, or is this resistance because I'm not in alignment with what's going on or the conversation that's being had, you know? Because there's a difference, right? And
a huge difference. Yeah.
And I think it's important to, you know, not necessarily say like, ooh, all things bad and scary are, you know, or all things hard are bad and scary, but it's also, okay, is this growth good for me? Such as like when you burn out in the gym and it really, really sucks, but it's like, that's what's necessary to grow. Yeah. Or did you just like tear a meniscus? You know, like there's a difference there.
Yeah, big difference. Big. One of them you're going to have surgery, and the other one you're going to have a couple of days and you're back to good.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I'm having to learn a whole bunch of tech stuff for the online side right now. I don't like tech.
Yeah.
But it's a growth resistance, not a negative thing. So it's just pushing through. It's using a lot of my glycogen right now. I have a bunch of spoons trying to learn. But at the end, I'm going to come back and it'll be easier and better for it. So
yeah. So I think like as far as managing the mindset and stuff, a lot of the negative, you know, we're more vulnerable, right, to negative thoughts, feelings, and emotions when we're sleep deprived, when our diet has a lot of refined sugar, refined carbs, alcohol, you know. So we have to look at those indicators as players in the experience that we're having in life. And I'm not going to tell you how to eat. I'm not going to tell you how to sleep, but make a conscious decision based on, do I want to feel like this right now, right? Like, am I showing up the highest and best version of myself? Is this experience serving me? And if it's not, what are some of these key indicators I can look at and modify so that I have a better experience in this, right? So I'm not showing up with depression and anxiety, and that maybe I have more capacity to really practice that stoicism. Whereas before, if you're too sleep deprived, you're not practicing anything. You're just surviving.
You're just a zombie, just showing up and
Yeah, exactly. So it does take a little bit of a level of self-care in your sleep, in your diet, and these other areas to be able to have that capacity to unpack the backpack, as we were saying, because it is a pretty laborsome task. It does cost a lot, you know?
Yeah.
You have to make sure you're taking care of yourself to kind of process everything. And on that note, I mean, I think it should be said and expected that all of us are processing and dealing with a lot, right? So if what you're able to take on a daily basis doesn't rival what you were able to take on 60 days ago, that's 100% okay. Leave the guilt at the door. Like, we don't need any more of that right this second.
Yeah, you don't need to beat yourself up. It's okay to be nice to yourself for a while.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think we've gone way over what we
planned. I know. If anybody makes it this far, thank you.
Yeah, you guys are rock stars. You're awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. I feel like we had a really good conversation and could go deep on any of those topics. That was really cool. There's a lot of stuff we could do there. I can share if anybody has any thoughts or questions or wants to continue any layers of these conversations. I can be reached at katesimon@gloveru.com. So first name, last name at gloveru.com. And yeah, I'll share a couple. Do you want me to share a couple of the resources?
Yeah.
So a couple of the things that have been resources for me, they may or may not be resources for you. Podcasts, I'm a really big fan of a lot of the TED Talks that are out right now. They actually have a specific series going on for what we're all kind of processing through this pandemic. It's called TED Connect or something like that. So check it out on Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. There's been some really cool topics there, and they're 20, 30 minutes. Books. Some of my favorite books have been Battlefield of the Mind by Joyce Meyer. Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach. That was probably like one of the best books that I read that got me to this point of like, all right, it's time to just kind of accept and let go of this stuff. So if you find yourself struggling with this like grappling of reality and what it should be, Tara Brach, Radical Acceptance is probably a good one for that. And then my last kind of suggestion here, guys, is you don't have to go at this on your own. And if you're kind of wondering like, oh, I need a mentor, like, oh, who could I do this with? Just get a small group of people who are like-minded, who have the same thoughts and goals that you do, and start a little mindset group. I've been doing this for years on and off, is I have a small little group of people where every morning we have a little Facebook group, and it's 10 things you're grateful for, what your intention is for the day, and then 10 delegations to God, source, universe, whatever that looks like. So every day we have a practice, 10 things you're grateful for. And it could be a day where I'm really angry or upset, and I'm grateful for coffee. I don't know. And it kind of gets like, the first couple feel really like silly and like, oh wow, this is really like elementary. And then you sort of soften through the process by the time you get to number 9 or 10, and you're like, wow, okay, my perspective has shifted. You put an intention out there. Like, I intend to be a contribution to the people I, come in contact with today. I intend this, I intend that. And then delegations, which is essentially, prayer and, gratitude for things that haven't happened yet. Like, I'm so grateful to God, source, universe for, all of this working out and, having a healthy, happy family or something better. Right. So and by the way, I've used that gratitude list, at any time during the day when I need a mindset shift. Like, I could be like totally pissed off, got off the phone with, an angry seller or whatever. And I bring out a pad of paper and it's just like, I'm like angrily scribbling things I'm grateful for. Right. But by the end of it, you're like, okay, that's kind of what I needed. Right. So yeah. Those are probably in the short list, and there's several more, but that's the short list of the most important and impactful tools that I could recommend right now.
That's awesome. I think there's actually been studies done on gratitude that it rewires the neural pathways in your brain.
I've read that too. Yeah.
Literally changes your brain.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's one of the best resources out there.
And it's one of those things where, like, if I'm rushing in the morning, it's like, oh, I don't have time for that. But 100% of the time when I make time for it, it's better. Like, everything, my whole experience is better. So it's kind of like brushing your teeth. It's like, all right, well, you need to do it every day, just get it done.
Maybe twice a day.
Right. Twice a day. Great.
Yeah. Just do it. No, that's awesome. I'll come up with some more resources. I'll get the link to that website with the test for the sleep chronotype. I don't do too many podcasts. There's only a couple I listen to. I usually do audiobooks more so than anything. But one of my favorites, here's a cool resource. If you're interested in Stoicism, I'll put the link in there. It's also on my Facebook page somewhere. But there's Letters of a Stoic by Marcus Aurelius.
So you're the second person who's recommended that in the last week, which means like it's time for me to get it. So
yeah. So Tim Ferriss, the author of the 4-Hour Workweek and the 4-Hour Chef and the 4-Hour Body and all that.
Everything.
Yes.
The 4-Hour Life.
Yeah. So he took them all. He had them converted to English.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, and he turned them all into PDFs and he gives them away for free. So all 3 books, it's like 900 pages with all the letters of the Stoics on there. And then also they got a narrator to read them all, and they're really cool.
Really?
You actually have to pay for those. They're on Audible.
Yeah.
I'll try to find the link on there. It's on Tim Ferriss's Audible link.
Okay.
So you can only get it there. It's only through his thing, and they're really good. Like,
awesome. Well, yeah, I'm definitely going to check that out because that's come up a couple times for me in the last week or so. So.
Yeah, I was listening to it last night, and there's a few letters on there as well that are really good, so I'll point those ones out. I think it's letter 18 on feasting and famine, just certain things that tie into a lot of stuff. There's one on the true joy, which comes from philosophy. It's letter 18 on festivals and fasting is a really good one.
Oh, okay.
And it's basically, it strips away the whole ego thing and talks about how he'll go a day, 2-3 days, where he eats the scantiest of fare and he'll wear like hobo clothes and go out in public.
Yeah.
While all the while asking, is this the condition I fear? So it's just really cool.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So, so I'll share that with you so you can get all the PDFs for free, and then I'll share the links so you can get the audio too.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. But yeah, that's the biggest one. The 4-Hour Workweek I love. Don't take it literally because that's what it's meant to be. Like, it's a title.
Right.
But it's on systems, models, and processes.
Yeah.
Pareto's principle and Parkinson's law. Like if you could take those things out of it, it can completely transform your life. Like it's really cool.
Yeah, I remember listening to it, back in 2014, 2015. And it was like, it really made me shift my perspective away from like, oh, the more time you put towards something, the more you get out of it. And it really helped me focus more on being efficient with that time and, making sure I had the systems in place to do that.
Yeah. And I'll share one more note. I think it's right here, but yeah, everybody wants to focus on hard work. If hard work alone got you results, like all the field workers would be millionaires. Maybe they should be, but they're not. You got to have like an aspect of perfectionism in there. You got to have organization, hard work, diligence. I mean, that's like 25% of the pie.
Yeah.
And then prudence. So basically the ability to govern and discipline yourself and your time and your resources. So like the whole 4-piece pie to it.
And I would add to that is just like having a direction too, right? I mean, you could essentially, run a marathon, but if you don't have a path that you're running, I mean, yeah, you still put in the same work, but where did you go, right? Yeah. So making sure that you have kind of a clear-cut path of what it is you're trying to achieve with that hard work and following that path as well.
Yeah. And there's one more resource I'll share. It's inexpensive. It's one of the few courses I'll pay for that I've already taken. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I think it's like $67 or something. But it's a guy, Ty Lopez, and he's like an internet guru, whatever. But he made a course at 67 steps. So it's based off of Gary Keller's One Thing, 66 days, 66 to get your habits going.
Oh, yeah.
So he made it 67 to add a day to make sure it sticks. So what he did was he took all his mentors, all the books he's read, everything, and compiled it into 67 steps with lessons and action steps for each one of them. So you come out with a new habit and a new mindset throughout the whole thing. And it's a really good process to go through. Yeah. So the first like 3 or 4 are about an hour long. And then after that, they're about 20 to 30 minutes. So you just do one of those each day, take some notes, and there's some really good thought processes and mindset shifts in there that whether you agree with it or not, it's there and it's just really cool stuff. So
awesome. I'll have to check that out.
All right, cool.
Thank you for taking your time to join Kate today on the Live Unreal with Glover U podcast. To get started on having an unreal business, take the real estate self-assessment. After you complete the assessment, a member of Glover U will get on a call with you to create an action plan to improve your score. Go to www.gloveru.com/self. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. Search for Live Unreal with Glover U on iTunes, Podbean, or Spotify, and subscribe today. Until next time, remember, you can accept things as they are. Accept a negative feeling or emotion without owning it and carrying it with you for the rest of the day.